Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, good morning. I'm Tabitha Ewing, and I serve as Dean of Studies at Bard High School Early College here in Manhattan, as well as Professor of History up at Bard in Annandale, where I'm teaching a course this semester, and I do every other semester. I'm delighted to welcome you here today to begin this conversation about lying and politics. But for now, I'd like to say just a couple of words about the Hannah Arendt Institute, or Center, for Ethical and Political Thinking. Hannah Arendt has a rich history with Bard College. Part of that history has to do with the fact that her husband, Heinrich Blücher, taught at Bard College and was buried there, as was Arendt herself. She donated her personal library with many heavily annotated books, works, and that became the foundation for the idea of the center in her name. But it was only when Roger Berkowitz came to Bard College, that's true, Roger, only when Roger came did we actually create the center. And at this point, twice yearly, we have these wonderful conferences that are unique in that they address thinking people. And they address thinking people about vital questions of our day. Reflection itself is shown to be dynamic. I'm going to introduce our director, who is Roger Berkowitz. He comes to us to Bard via Amherst College, where he got his BA, and Berkeley, where he received his law degree. His book, The Gift of Science, Leibniz and the Modern Legal Tradition, explores how the conflation of the practice of law and ideas of justice emerged in the early modern period. He has an extensive publication list of articles and even film reviews. And at Bard, Roger currently holds the position of associate professor teaching politics and human rights. He does tutorials on Heidegger, and it is in his role as director of the Hannah Arendt Center that he convenes our fine speakers today and this audience. Roger.
Before I begin, let me just also acknowledge that this conference is co-sponsored with the New School Hannah Arendt Center, and I want to acknowledge Dick Bernstein, who's been very helpful in working with us to plan this conference and get it together. So it's a great and promising collaboration between the two institutions, and I look forward to more of such things. In just a few months, in June of this year, Americans will celebrate a curious anniversary. The Pentagon Papers turned 40. For Hannah Arendt, what struck anyone who would sit down and read the 47 volumes of the Pentagon Papers was the quicksand of lying statements of all sorts, deceptions as well as self-deceptions. The untruths in the Pentagon Papers included factual deceptions, phony body counts, and doctored after-damage reports. But those factual lies, Arendt writes in her essay Lying in Politics, were known before they were published in the New York Times. Like the recent WikiLeaks releases of U.S. diplomatic cables that elicited a collective yawn from all but those who were caught with their feet in their mouths, the Pentagon Papers hardly revealed any spectacular news. The import of the Pentagon Papers was not the sudden revelation of unknown facts, but the light they shone on the dangers of self-deception. The lesson Arendt drew was that highly intelligent problem solvers could so easily convince themselves of their technocratic ability to steer the war that when the facts contradicted their theories and calculations, they concluded that it was the facts that must be wrong. What the Pentagon Papers showed, Arendt argued, was not the workings of a cabal seeking to deceive others for some end, so much as the powerful danger of lying to oneself. There are important differences between Ellsberg's release of the Pentagon Papers and WikiLeaks, the secretive, non-state collective of hackers that has reimagined the world of political leaking. Ellsberg, an insider in the Defense Department, released a report secretly commissioned by Robert McNamara that sought to figure out what had gone wrong. Bradley Manning, a lowly private, simply copied the contents of a hard drive containing diplomatic cables and emails. The ease and scale of WikiLeaks is symbolic of a transformation in the information society at large, and presages a world in which all information, from diplomatic secrets to private emails to websites that you surf, is subject to easy hacking and public exposure. If the Pentagon Papers was the end of innocence, WikiLeaks is the death of privacy. Ellsberg was driven to leak by frustration over a particular failed war and the propaganda machine that allowed it to continue. What angers Julian Assange and the legions of technologists aligned with WikiLeaks is secrecy in general. What WikiLeaks wants, according to its mission statement, is widespread transparency. The WikiLeaks thesis is simple if you go and read it on their website. It's that transparency frees information that leads to good government. If the basic issue of the Pentagon Papers was the danger of self-deception, the basic lesson of WikiLeaks is the danger of transparency. As Mika Sifry writes in his forthcoming book about WikiLeaks coming out next week, the age of transparency is here. This is not because one transnational online network dedicated to open information and whistleblowing named WikiLeaks exists, but because the knowledge of how to build and maintain such networks is now widespread. WikiLeaks is now joined by OpenSecret, UniLeaks for universities, TradeLeaks, and all of these operate on the presumption that transparency will usher in rational decision-making. In the utopian version of transparency, an empowered citizenry has full access to information so that they can repackage the news in blogs and tweets and participate in the collective act of governance now understood as problem-solving. Transparency is an old idea. And yet, transparency is hard to come by in mass democracy, as George Kateb will talk about later today. Popular deficiencies of attention combine with media concentration to set in motion an industry of spin, deception, and mass market deception. At this moment, many Americans wrongly think that Sarah Palin believes that Africa is a country, not a continent. Some believe that Iraqis participated in the 9/11 terrorist attacks in the United States, while others insist that a cabal of Americans and Jews collaborated with the US government to carry out the attacks. And 25% of the country, including some members of Congress, are convinced that our current president is not a US citizen. The problem here is neither secrecy nor a lack of transparency. Rather, amidst the surplus of fact and information, transparency overwhelms judgment, so that fact bleeds into opinion and opinion into fact. Consider human-induced global warming, something that is for 90% of scientists a fact, and for 50% of Americans, at most, an opinion. The lesson Arendt took from the Pentagon Papers was not the obvious one, that government secrecy and political lying are problems. Arendt is far from the gotcha culture that revels in exposing political lying today, a culture well represented over the last 20 years by books such as No One Left to Lie To, The Triangulations of William Jefferson Clinton by Christopher Hitchens, Lies and the Lying Liars Who Tell Them, A Fair and Balanced Look at the Far Right by Al Franken, Slander, Liberal Lies About the American Right, Ann Coulter, Big Lies, The Right-Wing Propaganda Machine and How It Distorts the Truth by Joe Conason, and many others. And so let me say, exposing lies and hypocrisy is important, especially among those whose self-assurance hides their hypocrisy from themselves and others. And yet, over-fetishization of hypocrisy can be dangerous. The problem with the popular pursuit of liars is that the hunt for hypocrisy is boundless. Who is not a liar? This is especially true in politics, where principled compromise with those with whom one disagrees is as necessary as it is right. Further, hypocrisy strips politicians of their public persona, leaving them naked. Politics needs authority, and there can be no authority when all politicians and institutions are mercilessly skewered for their lies and hypocrisies. Far from decrying all lying in politics, Arendt insisted that the deliberate falsehood and the outright lie are properly used as legitimate means to achieve political ends. She went even further and argued that truthfulness is not a political virtue. Politicians, she wrote, must know how to lie well. For lying well, the aggressive and active capacity to deny in thought and word what happens to be the case. To change the world through a lie, through imagination, is in many ways the center of politics. When one lies, one acts to change the world. There is, in other words, an intimate connection between lying and freedom. The democratic revolutions in the Middle East, to take only one example in the news, are grounded in the ability of opposition leaders to reject the reality they have known and to freely inaugurate a new world. These leaders and revolutionaries who follow them must embrace the lie that democracy will set them free. Now, why do I say that the freedom of democracy is a lie? Not because I mean to demean or critique democracy. Anything but that. Democracy is founded upon an idea that all people are equal. But the equality of all people, the great achievement of Enlightenment philosophy and politics, is, as Arendt writes, not something natural or true in any simple sense. The equality of all people is the, quote, result of human organization insofar as it is guided by principles of justice. As Arendt argued, human beings are not born equal, we become equal as members of a group on the strength of our decision to guarantee ourselves mutually equal rights. Equality, therefore, is a lie, a fiction, albeit a very useful and important fiction in the realm of politics. Our reverence for democracy often elides the fact that we are not a democracy, but a federal constitutional republic, one that self-consciously curtails the power of democratic voters by constitutional limitations and republican intermediary institutions. Other fictions include the fact that a nation of 300 million people of divergent classes, heritages, and concerns can adequately be represented by one president, 100 senators, and 535 members of Congress. Democracy is a lie, then, in the sense of the grand and dignified tradition of politics to improve the world by imagining new and ever more just ways of being in it. While it may at times be necessary to point out the ways in which our democracy fails to live up to its aspirations, the burnishing of the myth is equally, if not more important, than the exposure of its cracks. What Arendt reminds us is that if it is the great liars who change the world for the better or for the worse, and it is the great liars who are remembered as the great politicians. As central as lying may be to politics, certain lies corrode politics. The lies we should worry about, Arendt writes, are those active lies whereby facts are denied and alternative realities created. When deception, spin, and propaganda become the driving forces of politics, facts retreat behind the need for consistent talking points and coherent narratives. The essence of totalitarian rule is the elimination of those facts and those persons whose reality counters the coherent fiction underlying the state. Even in non-totalitarian states, the reduction of facts to simply another opinion corrodes the common sense and shared world that underlies a civil and engaged political sphere. The possibility of politics depends upon the continued availability of commonly accepted facts and pre-political truths that bind a polity together. In a time of seemingly infinite information, we are experiencing unprecedented doubts about facts. All kinds of authoritative claims made by leading public figures in recent years have turned out to be little more than thin air. One president may indeed have inhaled, and he may have had sex with that woman. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. The oil wells in the Gulf weren't safe as promised and ratified by government inspectors. We also are wont to question the once sacrosanct pre-political truths, such as the objectivity of science, as in the climate debate, and the justice of the Constitution. For transparency advocates like Mika Sifri again, the lesson is to distrust all truth-tellers, absolute transparency for power, and thus to bring absolute transparency for powerful actors. Sifri argues transparency seems to be the only way to restore trust in public institutions. But why do we think that even more information will lead to truth? Most of the lies we encounter are lies for which all the information needed to debunk them is in the public sphere. Instead of technology and transparency leading to knowledge and better government, it may be that the opposite is the case, that the embrace of technology actually increases the capacity for human beings to lie to others and themselves. As Yaron Lanier writes, no one in the pre-digital cloud, that cloud of information, no one in the pre-digital cloud era had the mental capacity to lie to him or herself in the way we routinely are able to now. It is counterintuitive, but the limitations of organic human memory and calculation used to put a cap on the intricacies of self-delusion. Now, entire professions rely on vast quantities of information, on calculations and algorithms that are beyond the power of any human to comprehend or to process. When we don't understand them, we can be led down paths that we don't understand and may not be true. In science, simulations allow chemists to combine elements that humans cannot see or combine in reality, that cannot even exist in reality. Architects can design buildings that humans can neither build nor live in. And in politics, rational models imagine human behavior in ways that are inhuman. Confronted with competing virtual realities, facts and reality fade in their impact, and we are ever more comfortable in a web of encompassing and competing ideologies. No thinker has explored the modern disempowerment of facts as has Hannah Arendt. In The Origins of Totalitarianism, Arendt showed how the alienation of 20th century individuals elicited a desire to escape reality and a demand for consistency. Unhappy people will choose to believe radical fictions that promise consistency and purpose over the decay and disaster of real life. A lying world of consistency is, Arendt saw, more adequate to the needs of the human mind than the vagaries of reality. Arendt expressed shock that highly respected statesmen like Charles de Gaulle and Konrad Adenauer had built their basic policies on such evident non-facts as that France belongs among the victors of the last war and hence is one of the great powers, and that the barbarism of National Socialism had affected only a relatively small percentage of the country. She was exasperated by Stalin's rewriting of history to exclude Trotsky. The political activity of lying, she saw, denies facts and creates alternate realities. What Arendt shows is that the realm of abstractions and simulations allows for the preservation and extension of fictions in ways heretofore unimaginable. Even when facts that contradict a fiction exist, those facts can be eliminated or imagined away. That is the power of living in increasingly virtual realities. Once all standards of truth and honesty fall prey not only to doubt, but to simulation and technological fabrication, humanity may finally be freed to live in a Frankenstein world of its own making. On behalf of Dick Bernstein and the Hannah Arendt Centers at Bard and the New School, I'm very happy to welcome you here today. We have the benefit of 5 excellent papers by 5 justly renowned speakers. Today, in mere minutes, I hope, is Andreas here? Yes? You'll hear Andreas Kalavas speak about the freedom that lying promises, its intimate connection with action and politics. This afternoon, Kirsty McClure will explore the danger, not of intentional lies, but of lies that come from factual inaccuracies generated within large-scale organizations, what she calls structural lies. And at 4 p.m. this afternoon, George Kateb will think through the paradox of transparency, which at once is the legitimating ground of democratic self-rule, and also risks suffocating facts and truths in a mass democracy under the weight of the mass media. Tomorrow, when we reconvene downtown at the New School, at the Teresa Lang Center auditorium, Uday Mehta will offer, that's at 11 o'clock, will offer the example of Gandhi as a truth teller, someone whose extreme seclusion from self-interest and politics made him trustworthy, thus someone who might provide a common ground for politics. And finally, at 2 o'clock tomorrow, Roger Hodge explores our current capacity for self-deception, a capacity that he finds to be exhaustive and as troubling as it is limitless in our current president. The very fact that so many of you are here is evidence that the question of lying in politics is one of the fundamental questions of our time. It is a question too important to leave to scientists, politicians, and talking heads. It is a question that every single one of us as citizens needs to think about. Only in comprehending the true challenges that systematic, virtual, and aggressive lying poses for politics can we resist hollowing out politics by the superficial lies that grow like a fungus on the body politic. It is in the spirit of restoring a vibrant politics that can dare to lie greatly, while at the same time recognizing the facts and truths that comprise our common world, that I now invite you to think with and against our speakers over the next 2 days. So thank you. And we have about 4 minutes, but I'll introduce Jennifer Colbert from Johns Hopkins University, who's going to introduce our next speaker. You want to come up here?